Recording some quick post-read thoughts for Goodreads of A New World Begins by Jeremy Popkin. Um, this book is a history of the French Revolution, and this is a book that I really liked. It instantly became probably one of my favorite nonfiction, specifically true history books. I think that anytime you have a book that's trying to be a comprehensive look at the French Revolution, it's kind of fighting an uphill battle just because A, it's already a very complex event, but then B, there's such an extended period of time that I think the author has to decide like where they want to specifically focus, when they want to cut off like the end point of the revolution. And sometimes I think it can be difficult for an author to kind of sustain that narrative the entire way. But I thought that Popkin did such a good job all the way throughout. He even took this story all the way to the Brumaire coup, and then he did do a 40 to 50 page epilogue covering Brumaire until Napoleon's rise as emperor specifically. So he covered 1799 to 1804, and then at like the very, very end used a few pages to kind of talk about what happened after that. And then kind of in that epilogue just echoing like some of the longer term effects of the revolution, what it all meant, but then obviously like how a lot of it was kind of just put in contrast with what the rise of Napoleon's effective dictatorship looked like, and then the Bourbon Restoration going forward from there. So I thought that was pretty interesting that at least the entire arc of that is covered. It's pretty cool to see some of Napoleon's reign discussed as well. But I would say that, that's covering a very expansive period of time. So the story proper ends at Brumaire. And I really got to say, like, I was extremely impressed just with how the book flowed extremely well. Like, there's a lot of information. It's about 600 pages of text, but it flows really quickly. I think he does a good job of inserting a lot of kind of section breaks where he moves from a specific topic, giving you a lot of information, and then kind of moving forward to maybe giving it from like a different primary source or just a different perspective of people or specific person or something like that. And I think that helped the narrative flow extremely well. I do think he did a good job of setting up, he spent a couple of chapters on the kind of like pre-revolution, if you will, diving into a lot of the financial crisis and the attempts at reforms, and he discussed the kind of the foreign policy situation in France at the time, especially after the fallout from the 7 Years' War, the decision to back the United States in the American Revolution and things like that, and how both that and the financial crisis both directly, set up 1789. So there's enough room for good setup. I think that as with kind of anything on the French Revolution, it helps if you have a little bit of background at least going into it, because I think you can get more out of it. Because if you're trying to cover this much history in just 600 pages, there's going to be some topics that have to be covered pretty quickly. And I felt that especially for the pre-revolution period, it's covered extremely well. But again, there's just a lot of information, because that's, if you're looking at like Louis XVI's ascendancy until 1789, there's a lot of stuff that happens in there, to even get you to the start. It's, the true start in 1789 of the fall of the Bastille. So he covers that in about the first 100 pages. And I will say, while reading this, I re-listened to Mike Duncan's season on the Revolutions podcast on the French Revolution, which is absolutely excellent. And I kind of tried to coincide it with the time periods that Popkin covered in this book, and I thought it was a really cool. I think they balanced each other well, where usually Duncan would spend more time on a particular topic than Popkin, but there were cases where it was the inverse. And I just really like seeing the different perspective and the different deep dives and details and how they chose to tell specific stories, especially like the major journeys throughout the entire revolution. So that was pretty cool, and something that I think it's very doable, because this book is really good about splitting chapters into like major either time periods or events in particular. And so it's pretty easy to follow along with something like that if that's what someone wanted to do. So I really enjoyed listening to that again alongside reading this book. And I mean, I'm trying to think of even what else to highlight, because I do think it's all extremely well done. I liked that the very first chapter, he did something pretty interesting. He kind of just represented a dichotomy of, it was Louis the 16th and then just another member of the Third Estate who he kind of used to show just like the rise and fall of kind of what the Third Estate represented in the French Revolution, and kind of like how that trajectory changed from the pre-revolution times forward. And so I liked how he set that up, and he gave a lot of background information on both to kind of just like, again, show that difference between a noble, specifically somebody of royal blood, obviously in Louis the 16th, who became king, and then somebody else of the Third Estate who essentially was like viewed as powerless until the French Revolution came and literally turned everything on its head. I think he did a really good job at giving justice to the major set pieces of the revolution, specifically like the start of the Estates General, the Tennis Court Oath, and then like the fall of the Bastille, like the Women's March on Versailles or the October Days, and then other things like, you know, the insurrection of August the 10th, the trial and execution of Louis the 16th, and onward, like through the Committee of Public Safety and some of the major coups that ensued after the Thermidorian reaction. I think he handled all the big stuff really well. There may have been some cases where I wished he went in even further detail. Like in particular, I thought like the trial of Louis the 16th is extremely interesting. I wish we had got more kind of like from the Women's March on Versailles, because I think that's a pretty fascinating set piece in the revolution. So there's specific cases where I wish we got more detail, but again, he's trying to cover so much information that it kind of has no choice but to just continuously flow. So I definitely get it, and I do think that he does them justice in pretty much all cases, but you kind of wish you could get a little bit more in some instances. But again, that's just like the nature of having a history that's this expansive. I think he did a really good job of bringing in some other topics on things that might be like underrepresented, like the Haitian Revolution in particular, and the like the role of women and other minorities in and just their involvement in the revolution. And I think in particular, like he's written a lot on the Haitian Revolution specifically, so I think that's a pretty cool way to represent the dichotomy of, like, as you know, similar to the American case with slavery, as you have all of these, you know, like these declarations of rights and the idea of natural liberty and freedom for all kind of being dichotomized there with a colony that was, you know, not entirely, but the entire backbone of that portion of industry on the colony of Saint-Domingue was contingent upon there being slavery. And so being able to kind of juxtapose the two, I think he did a really good job with that, kind of tracing the trajectory of that. He doesn't go into a ton of detail, but you do get to see kind of like the major players like Toussaint Louverture, I think I may be pronouncing that wrong, but his kind of rise and his role throughout the Haitian Revolution, and then like how the various legislative assemblies during the revolution kind of have to deal with that, and how they have kind of like different opinions throughout depending on who's in power at the time. So I thought that was cool. And then again, highlighting like the very prominent role that women played, like not only in the October Days, but then in something like the fall of the Bastille, the insurrection of August the 10th, or even the first initial storming of the Tuileries Palace in, I think it was late June before the insurrection, that officially deposed Louis the 16th. But I think, again, he did a really good job with that. And I'm trying to think of what else, just because there was so much here. You know, I like that he covered things like the XYZ affair, or Citizen Genet in the US, being a big early American history fan, of course, and seeing that kind of overlap was pretty interesting. learned something new, that Toussaint Louverture, however you say that name, actually was able to get an exception for when the American quasi-war, the undeclared naval war with France broke out, an exception for Haiti to continue trading with them, even though we were obviously, or the U.S. was technically, not technically, I guess, but basically was at war with France from a naval perspective. That was pretty cool. And again, I think he gave little tidbits like that throughout on a lot of different topics, but that was something that I thought was interesting because I have looked at the XYZ affair in some detail and did not know about that. So that was pretty cool to learn. This is definitely a book that I would revisit just because I think it's really, really well done, and there's so much info that I think you could go back to it and get something new out of it, or something that kind of like is a solid reminder or something after revisiting. But he definitely did justice to all of the major events. It flowed extremely well. I think even like on a reread, it would, be able to get through it even quicker the second time around. So this is an extremely impressive book on, if you're looking for something on the history of the French Revolution. I mean, it is a good starting point because pretty much everything is covered, and it feels accessible, and that it's very readable, and it flows extremely well. So I would definitely recommend it. I would give this 5 stars. So I was definitely a big fan, really enjoyed reading it, and I would read more of his stuff, but I think he's written more like academic type works on the French Revolution and the Haitian Revolution. And I think this is kind of like his crowning achievement, if you will, being such a comprehensive history on the French Revolution. So yeah, New World Begins, I would give it 5 stars.